Hi, my name is Stacey Camp, and I'm one of several on a team who received a National Park Service's Japanese American Confinement Site grant to digitize and share the history of both Idaho's Minidoka War Relocation Center as well as Idaho's Kuski Internment Camp. And today I'm here in one of our labs at Michigan State University where I work, and I'm going to share a little bit about what we are doing as part of this grant. So I am an associate professor of anthropology and director of the campus archaeology program at Michigan State University, and one of my roles is to educate people about the past, not only campus history, but the history of diasporic communities and migrant communities in the late 19th and early 20th century West. Many years ago, I was a faculty member at the University of Idaho, and I was working with Dr. Priscilla Wagers, who is a scholar there, and she had interviewed a number of people who were incarcerated at Idaho's Kuski Internment Camp, and she had mentioned that the camp hadn't been studied archaeologically. And so Dr. Wagers and I went and visited the site and discovered there were a number of archaeological components of the site. So I applied for a Japanese American Confinement Sites program grant, and I received a number of them to do archaeological research at the site as well as to do laboratory research. So that was back in 2008. So I've been on this project and leading this project for quite a long time. What are we doing here in the lab? So the artifacts that are out on this table here and the table and shelves behind me are artifacts that were recovered from the Kuski Internment Camp. And the Kuski Internment Camp was a World War II Japanese American incarceration facility for a predominantly Issei population. And for those of you who don't know, Issei refers to first-generation Japanese people who came here to the United States. The Kuski Internment Camp was for people who were considered enemies of the state in the government's eyes, and so they were treated in a very different way than the incarcerees at Minidoka War Relocation Center. The people who were at Minidoka were predominantly Japanese American citizens. The people at Kuski were not citizens because they legally could not obtain American citizenship because of the racially exclusionary laws of the time. And so the people at Kuski were subject to the Geneva Convention because they were considered prisoners of war due to the fact that they were undocumented. So the kinds of material culture that they were given, I've argued, is a lot different than what we find at Minidoka War Relocation Center. And so some of the artifacts that we see behind me are artifacts that the Kuski Internment Camp incarcerees would have consumed food on, they would have bought potentially, or the government would have provided them with. And I'll just talk about a little bit of our process here in the lab as it pertains to the digital project that we are doing. So the artifacts that we recovered were really dirty when we first found them in the dirt and excavated them. It took about 2 years to clean all of the artifacts that we found at the Kuski Internment Camp. We excavated the site for 2 different summers. So we obtained a lot of artifacts, but it took a lot of time to clean them. After the artifacts have been cleaned and washed, then we end up cataloging them. So each artifact gets an individual sheet that tells the archaeologist a little bit about that individual artifact. So we'll weigh it, we'll measure it, we try to identify it, potentially date it if it has information that is dateable on it. And then after it's cataloged, that's when it's the opportunity to kind of figure out what cross-mends, what artifacts fit together. So cross-mend means artifact fits together. And we do that with glass, which is on the back table here, and with ceramics that is on the front table here. So once those artifacts have been cataloged, they get a unique identifiable number on them. So each artifact has a number that traces them back to that catalog sheet. That's called their catalog number. And that catalog number also helps us figure out where on the archaeological site the artifact was recovered. So that gives us what we call provenience information about where that artifact was specifically found on the landscape of the Kuski Internment Camp. So every artifact has been labeled with that catalog number on it. It also has a number that tells us that it's from the Kuski Internment Camp, and that number is assigned by the federal government. So all those artifacts have to be labeled with that information. After they're labeled, then we put them out on a table based off what we call their wear type or composition. So we group all of the little fragments of artifacts that we found of colorless glass, for instance, on that table. And then we group all of the fragments of ceramics that are particular style or form, like plates, cups, together. And then it's like one big puzzle. We try to see what fits together, what cross-mends, like I just said. So that will allow us, once we've cross-mended them and seen what fits together, that will allow us to figure out how many different plates people had, of what kinds of plates did they have, what were they eating their food on, were they eating using predominantly bowls, were they using bowls that were found or made in Japan, were they using bowls that were manufactured in the United States, were they using bowls that were manufactured somewhere else. So this gives us a broad picture of what people are doing at the Kuski internment camp. So that's what we're doing right now. It's a pretty lengthy process. It requires a lot of patience and time. But once we're finished with this, we plan to then create 3D models of the plates and bowls and other artifacts that we've cross-mended and fit together so that the public can see what we found. So that's a little bit about our research process. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we appreciate your support.
So we're in the MSU Digital Heritage Imaging and Innovation Lab, and we are using structured light scanning to create 3D models of artifacts found at the Kuski camp. So what we're able to do with this method of scanning is create pretty exact replicas of the actual artifacts themselves and make a digital 3D model that represents those artifacts and then share them with a broader audience.